created to have some fun together, sharing and singing. So, join and enjoy.
Our love for opera brings us together. Thanks for being with us in this trip.
And today we are having ChatGPT to tell us a little or a lot, or to tell us the most possible around one of the greatest opera composers, German composer. We are talking about Richard Wagner. I'm pretty sure that most of you have already heard a number of times around Mr. Wagner, who was a character himself, and there is a lot that has been said around Richard Wagner, and at the same time, there is very little that has been actually said. Seems to be too much talk around him, and at the same time, repeating the same over and over again, the cycle of the Nibelung Ring and the cycle of the Nibelung Ring, and it looks to many people that Richard Wagner was only the composer of the cycle of the Nibelung, or only that he is the one who developed what we understand now as a leitmotif, who maximized the use of the leitmotif. But Mr. Wagner was much more than those two concepts that I have just mentioned, and this is what we will be having a conversation today. And of course, I am inviting you to join me on that conversation. Please don't forget that if you want to send an email, please do so. Opera Will of Singing at gmail.com. Opera Will of Singing at gmail.com. Also, I think I have repeated it a good number of times. We are working with ChatGPT 3.5 as of this November 2023. Of course, we know that every release or upgrade that is made to this AI brings improvements, but this is what we are using today. If in the future, not sure when something else will arrive into this technological arena and challenge the current domain or the current le royaume de ChatGPT, that may eventually happen, and maybe by the time you listen to this program in a couple of years, you will just say this guy just wasted his time in talking about something that nobody else cares about it. Nobody else cares about it anymore, any longer. But for the time being, this is what we have, and this is what we are going to have our conversation today. Um, to many, Richard Wagner has been the best German opera composer of all times. It is not that Germany has had many. We have to be very sincere in terms of opera, at least in number of composers of the classical period. Italy is leading in the number of relevant composers, in the number of composers whose operas have remained in the common repertory. Also, it could be Italians and French and maybe Germany later. Of course, you need to consider that Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was from Austria. He was not German. So keeping that in mind, there are there are not more than two or three names that you can give for the German repertory. And of course, you have to talk about Richard Wagner if you talk about Germany and what this country gave to the world of opera. But now enough with the talk, enough with the introduction. And remember that the first question that I like to ask, where you get most of the platitudes or the nonsense or the wrong information or just vague sentences which are very shallow, is in the first question of the 500 words. So ChatGPT suggests, usually the first part is usually correct. Keep in mind that he was born in the year 1813. 1813, keep that number in mind, and he dies in 1883. This means that he was somehow contemporary with the mature Rossini, fully contemporary with Donizetti, with the early Verdi, not with the mature Verdi, but moreover with the early and middle Verdi, and before Giacomo Puccini. If we were to give a very simplistic timeline of where he was having, of who were his contemporaries, these were his contemporaries. He was not really contemporary of Beethoven. Beethoven, another great German composer, but even though we know that Beethoven did something in the field of opera. Truth is that uh, uh, Fidelio, his most well-known opera, is hardly ever on stage for a number of reasons that we are not discussing today. But with that, keeping in mind, is more for orchestral music, Beethoven and piano, rather than operas. That's what leaves room to Mr. Richard Wagner. But there is a couple of things that I would like to mention before we move on. How should we remember Richard Wagner? Who is Richard Wagner? We need to take that question first in consideration. And what ChatGPT suggests as part of the question for this is that uh, renowned for his profound influence on the course of Western classical music, Wagner's impact extends beyond his compositions. He was a controversial figure known for his complex personality and significant contributions to opera. So basically, ChatGPT doesn't tell us anything. He was born in Leipzig, of course, part of the known now territory of Germany. Wagner was also a talented, he was identified as a musical talent early in his life. That means that so far, at least for the number of composers that we have had in the cycle, Rossini, Mozart, Donizetti, Verdi, and now Wagner, there seems to be a timeline in all of them where you can identify that they have the point they have in common is that they show their musical talent very early in life. That is also the case of Wagner. Here comes one of the most important points that ChatGPT provides. His operas, in particular, broke with the conventional forms, introducing the concept of Gesamtkunstwerk, or total work of art, where music, drama, and visual elements merged seamlessly. And here I think that we need to make a pause because this is very important. If and maybe you have, if you are not familiar with the compositions of Richard Wagner, maybe you have asked yourself if Richard Wagner was so important, was one of the key composers for the German repertory. Why is it that we don't know him by important or well-known areas such as Vesti la Giuba? Why don't we have Richard Wagner's version of Vesti la Giuba? Why don't we have a female character such as Chocho-san? Why don't we have a beautiful Mimi? Why don't we have any character like we have in the Italian opera? Why don't we have a Carmen? A Carmen, someone who be the same that Carmen is to be said. Why don't we have a Carmen for Wagner? How can he be a great composer when it is almost impossible to anybody to identify any of the main characters he ever wrote about? And the reason is what we just mentioned. His art, or what he perfected, because many people think that the cycle of the ring is of course one of his top creations, but people think that it just came out almost of nowhere. And of course, the cycle of ring of the Nibelung is the result of an art that he perfected throughout the time. That art is what he called what I just mentioned, the Gesamtkunstwerk, or total work of art. This means that contrary to what used to happen in the music, mostly for the Italian and French music, where you have clearly divisions of arias, duets, introductions, parts that are spoken, the parlatos, the declamatos, the concertantes for wrapping up the end of each of the acts. You don't have any of those. What you have instead is a continuous flow of action, a continuous flow of music, a continuous flow of words that are very melodical and that are building a story, that are building the story that Richard Wagner wants to tell us about. And that's what his concept of total work of art meant. He meant, I am not giving an aria. L'amour est un oiseau. I am not giving mi chiamano Mimi. I am not writing an aria such as the one for Rodolfo. I am not writing, of course, Nessun Dorma hadn't been composed, so it is poorly an example. Or he is not writing La Donna Mobile. He's not writing anything like that. He's not writing operas in the concepts of numbers that can be extracted, played alone, and reproduced easily. What he's thinking of or what he's aiming at is building a corpus, I will say a world. I would like to start using now in the program the word world. What Wagner decides to do is to build worlds around a story. This world around a story cannot be understood by just taking out an excerpt of it. That is why we don't have clearly divided or clearly identified areas, because it is not as in the Italian or French repertory, where you have the introduction or presentation area of one of the characters, then you have the aria where he explains why he's suffering, and then you have the final aria playing full of virtuosity as in Donizetti. Wagner did not believe in that. Wagner believed in the construction of a world where everything makes sense from any of the notes of the rings, of the metals, or any of the instruments along with each of the voices. Each of the voices was there to build that purpose, to build that world. So the dwarf, and so when you talk about Alberich has a purpose in that story. The one who steals the gold. Why are the Norns there? Why is destiny like that? Why is Odin like that? Why are all those gods so perfect and imperfect at the same time, playing all together to tell us a story? And they are playing, each one having his own intermission, each one of them having or playing a very specific role that only makes sense when you see the whole story, when you see everything that has been constructed as a result. Of course, in the other repertories, you can always take an aria such as Nemorinos and say, Una furtiva lagrima, ta-da-da-da-da-da. And it really doesn't matter if you know who Nemorino was, what was the story in the Donizetti's aria, what is coming before, what is going to happen last, what is the mood of Nemorino. You don't know to do that. You just need to go to a concert, have the tenor sing it, do it properly, and if you like it, you will give it an applause. But that is not what Wagner was aiming at. He was aiming at capturing the people's attention for a good number of time, because Wagner's productions, Wagner's creations are very lengthy. People know that if you are attending to see either Parsifal or any of the cycles of the Nibelung, it will take you more than 2 hours in the concert hall. You know that if you go to watch Rossini's or Verdi's, it will take you some time between 2 and 3 hours, and there will be a continuous flow. But if you're going to see Wagner, you really need to be paying full attention in order to trying to understand what he is conveying you in that world that he created. And this is where I wanted to stop for a second, just to try to explain a little of what this concept of the Gesamtkunstwerk or total work of art means. This is what Wagner gave his art for. Here it says Wagner's magnum opus, The Ring of the Nibelung, a four-opera cycle, exemplifies his artistic vision. It explores themes of power, love, and redemption within a mythical framework. The orchestral richness of Wagner's use of leitmotifs, recurring musical themes associated with specific characters or ideas, set a new standard in operatic composition. This is the second important topic to if you want to describe Wagner. The first one was the Gesamtkunstwerk, and the second one is the leitmotif. As it is explained in the words of ChatGPT, a leitmotif is a recurring musical theme associated with a specific character or idea. What was the purpose of Wagner of using all these leitmotifs? The purpose of creating all these leitmotifs that occur throughout his cycle of the Nibelung or throughout Parsifal or any of his creations is to give the sense of completeness and interrelation. What Wagner is telling the audience is, hey, this is not this is not something that is happening in the vacuum. This is not something that is happening by the result of chance. This is happening because it has to do with something else. That's what really Wagner means when he's using these leitmotifs. He's giving you the idea of, hey, here is a theme to remind you that there is a maledizione, that there is a malediction on the gold that was stolen and that was later used in the ring. Hey, remember that if it happens here, then the gods will be destroyed, the gods will perish. That's what all these leitmotifs means are built in the worlds that Wagner creates. They are all of them are there to emphasize, to make people aware that things are happening for a reason. In Wagner's operas, all of his creations, all the events that are taking place are always interrelated. Either they are related to things that happened recently, or they will be the part of the cause of something that will happen later. Or maybe this is the result of something that happened generations before, such as in Siegfried. Or maybe not even what happened a generation before, but maybe centuries before. Maybe that prediction that says that all gods will perish was known or has been known for millennials or hundreds of years already. This is why I like to insist that Wagner actually creates worlds. These are worlds where everything is related from the smallest sound, from each of the phrases of the singers, and from each of the events that we are going to watch on the scene. Everything has a purpose, and since everything is connected, this is why you cannot take just a piece, an aria. We don't have the equivalent of the Nessun Dorma of the tenor. We do not have an equivalent of that in Siegfried because he doesn't have that, because he has no presentation area, because he is not doing those kind of monologues. He's playing his role in that world, in that story, and that's what he is there. And that is why I would like to mention it now. And I don't mean I don't want to say, or I mean no negative side on the compositions by Italian or French composers, but as I was telling you before, maybe you can listen to the Caro Nome in the presentation of a soprano and listen to the Caro Nome ta ta ta. You don't really need to know who Gilda was. You just need to listen to the singer. Many of the times you don't even need to know what she's actually singing. You just need to like the sounds and the melody and give your applause at the end. But that is not the case for Wagner. Wagner is not providing you arias or duets to be taken out from their context in the opera to be sung separately. They are to remain where they belong, where they were created to be. That's where Wagner decided to put each of his characters in the story. And maybe I should mention that if you are finding that we have more background noise that before, is because we are actually, or I am actually recording in the outdoors in a very nice place, by the way, by a river. So you may eventually listen to the wind. I have a couple of trees right in front of me. The river is crossing right in front of me, and there are a good number of birds around. So maybe I should have mentioned that earlier, but I found that this is a very nice place to come to record the program. But now, going back to Wagner, now that we have mentioned the two important parts, the Gesamtkunstwerk and the leitmotif, let's keep on moving with the description of uh, ChatGPT. However, Wagner's legacy is not without controversy. His anti-Semitic writings, notably Judaism in music, have drawn criticism, and his music was later embraced by the Nazi regime, even though Wagner himself died decades before the rise of Adolf Hitler. Um, this association with anti-Semitism and Nazism has complicated assessment of Wagner's life and work. You know what my opinion on this subject is. I I shared this with you more than a year ago. It was a program with Katia, and I mentioned there that for some reason that I really cannot understand, we people like to keep thinking about musicians and artists as if they were politicians. And Wagner, even though he had his political position very clear, he was not a politician, he was an artist. So whatever interpretation we want to take now of what he did then is basically unfair, because he never published the cycle of the Nibelung for the German pure audiences. He never did such a thing. Of course, he had in his mind very clear what he thought of the German breed and what they deserved. Of course, he had those ideas, but he was not an open politic on it. And that's why I think sorry about that. I think it's not only irrespectful, but also a waste of time to spend the time talking about whether he was anti Semitic and whether he was related to the Nazi. That happened over 40 years later after he died. Why the effort of relating something that happened 50 years after he deceased? It's just looking for something that will really take us nowhere, because if that would be the reason for not listening to Wagner, then remember that there are other composers who have been favorites, and artists have been favorites of people of power. Just keep in mind that the Austro-Hungarian Empire did very nasty things themselves, and Mozart was Austrian. So let's stop listening to Mozart. So let's not talk about Mozart because Mozart is related to the Austro-Hungarians. I mean, that's the level of the conversations that we are having. Okay, so, but keep talking about the important things. Uh, Wegner's personal life was as tumultuous as his compositions. His relationships, particularly with King Ludwig II of Bavaria, played a significant role in financing his ambitious projects. Wagner's affair with Cosima von Bülow, the wife of conductor Hans von Bülow, also added a layer of scandal to his life. Financial struggles plagued Wagner throughout much of his career, leading to periods of exile and seeking patronage. Also, remember that it is the case for most of the greatest composers that we talk about now. Most of them struggled financially, if not all of their life, for several periods of their lives. That was so far the only exception that we have mentioned in this series of programs has been Maestro Verdi, even though also he had very severe limitations at the beginning of his career. Luckily, it improved throughout time, but at the beginning he was not that lucky. So Wagner was no exception. He had financial problems, And Wagner's influence extended beyond his lifetime, shaping the work of subsequent composers and sparking debates around the relationship between art and politics. His impact on the development of opera, his innovative use of orchestration, and his complex legacy as blah, 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 only platitudes and platitudes and platitudes. So that is the first question. But it is, if you remember now, we have mentioned that Mozart was a very prolific composer. Same case for Rossini, same case for Donizetti, and somehow that was also the case for Verdi. Now, what happens with Wagner? Since we still have lots of material to cover, and we are not giving any detail on the plots of the or the librettos of the operas that I am going to mention, and they are much less. I would like to name them in chronological as they were composed. Diffien, The Fairies in 1833 means he composed it at the age of 20. Uh, Thy Liebes Verbot, The Band of Love, completed in 1836, which means that he was 23 years by then. Rienzi, der letzte der Tribunen, Rienzi, the last of the tribunes, 1840, 7 years, 4 years later after The Band of Love. Notice that. The Fliegende Hollander, The Flying Dutchman, premiered in 1843. Some 3 years later, when you're used to listening that Rossini, Donizetti, and Mozart composed operas in matter of weeks, when you watch at Wagner's and see that it took them 2 to 4 years to compose each of them, you notice that there is something different happening here. Next one, Tannhäuser unter Sangerkrieg auf Wartburg. Tannhäuser and the Minstrel contest at the Wartburg. Lohengrin in 1850. Many years have passed, 5 years more after Tannhäuser. Then 15 years later, after Lohengrin, look at that number. 15 years after Lohengrin, Tristan und Isolde, 1865. Then the Meistersinger von Nuremberg, the Master Singers of Nuremberg, 1868. Then we arrive to the cycle of the gold of the ring, das Rheingold, the first of the cycle, 1869. Seifel-Kür, Defeil-Kür, 1870. Siegfried, 1876, 6 years later. Götterdämmerung, Twilights of the Gods, the final one, 1876. That one is the final composition in this order of operas by Wagner. So if you break the cycle of the ring into four, then you have 12 operas. Only 12 operas were composed by Maestro Wagner. Why so few? Many people say that he composed much fewer than the others because he spent time in quality rather than in quantity. Of course, that can be part of a debate because if you like, for instance, La Traviata, it is unfair to compare, for instance, the Fliege Hollander, to compare the Flying Dutchman to La Traviata. Which is better? Of course, you always have, and especially, and we are going to talk about it, there are people who are fans of the works of Wagner and who consider any other composer that is not Wagner as a second level or even third level when compared to Wagner. And that is also because we humans like to make comparisons, right? Since we love to make comparisons, we used to say that. But if you take, even if you don't want to consider that it is true, that it is quality over quantity, you still have to notice that he invested lots of time in creating each of his operas. Also, if you know German people, you know that German take their time to do anything. If you want to take someone more impulsive, you go for a Latino or maybe an Italian. But Germans are certainly not that impulsive. So you cannot take out the fact that Wagner was German, and as such, many of the characteristics of the people of Germany are not only part of his compositions, but are also part of the way he behaved. Why did it take him so long? Because Germans are very careful and very detailed in what they do. And moreover, because Wagner knew that he wanted to build something so particular, so different, something that really meant what he wanted to describe as his conception of the world and music, that he needed to take the time that was needed. He certainly needed money, but he preferred to give the time he needed to create each of his operas. So, once having mentioned, sorry, once having mentioned the order, the chronological order of his operas, it's now time to talk about the Wagnerian voices. You may have heard also uh, that for the German repertory, you need a held and tenor. And some people say if we needed to compare, because in order to understand, we needed to compare it to things that we know. When we say what is a Helen tenor for the German repertory, moreover, for the repertory of Wagner, the Helen tenor is a voice, and we are speaking only of the tenor, but we need to make it valid for all the other voices. The voices for singing Wagner are need to be huge voices, high volume, very with lots of stamina, because Wagner's orchestration is usually heavy. This is not a light, nice, beautiful melody such as Bellini's or maybe sometimes as in Rossini's. No, there are parts where the orchestration of Wagner is really heavy, and you really need a powerful voice that not can only be that can be that not only can be heard among the instruments of the orchestra, but also has the volume and the power and the stamina and the endurance, because as we mentioned, that the duration of Wagner's operas are lengthy. Moreover, when we compare them to the Italian repertory, that means that the singers are on stage singing for long and long and long and long. That demands a type of voice that is rarely found in the in Latin America, or even in Italy or other countries in Europe. Slavic voices do better for the German repertory. They have that type of color, because even the lightest, I mean light, not heavy voices, even the light voices of the Wagner repertory is much heavier than any voice of a tenor of the Italian repertory. A tenor for Rodolfo, even Cavaradossi for Tosca, will not do it for Wagner. He will not be able to sing at that level of volume, at that level of stamina. That takes a very different voice. Also, we need to mention that Wagner voices are not beautiful voices. The stories, the worlds that Wagner created are not meant to be just for beautiful voices. Also remember that the heavier the voice, the most likely that the voice will not be beautiful. We have mentioned in the past that usually beautiful or light voice, beautiful are light voices. Light voices are more likely to have harmonics and to sound better. But the heavier the voice, the most likely it will not be a nice voice, and that is the case for the Wagner's repertory. You go through the catalog of voices that have sung Wagner, and you will not find a beautiful voice there. That applies for the tenors, sopranos, the mezzos, the baritones, and the basses. There are really not beautiful voices singing German repertory or more specific Wagner, because Wagner really didn't mean to be just beautiful. If you want to look for beautiful, you go and look for Mimi in Puccini. If you want beautiful, go and look for Liu in Puccini. If you want beautiful, go for Lucia. in Donizetti's. But if you want beautiful, you don't go to Wagner. You go to Wagner for something else, for enjoying that full experience. So, what does ChatGPT is telling us around these characteristics of the Wagnerian singer? Wagner's operatic works are known for their demanding vocal and dramatic requirements. Here are some of the requirements. Powerful voice, yes, because Wagner usually requires large orchestra. A strong, resonant voice is crucial to cut through the dense textures. That is so very true. Extended range. I'm not so sure about. Not, I really don't agree with this one. Wagnerian roles often demand a wide vocal range, particularly for dramatic sopranos and held tenors. Singers need to handle both high, soaring lines and lower, more intense passages. Truth is that Wagner does not sing, if, even for the sopranos and for the tenors, he does not write high notes. Not that often. There is not an equivalent of the Di Quella Pira, an equivalent of a Mesami in the compositions of Wagner's. Because remember that he's not creating the story or recreating the world by arias. He's recreating that world in the interconnection of many elements on stage. So I wouldn't agree on the extended range. Endurance. Wagnerian operas are lengthy, what I just mentioned, so we need to agree. Dramatic expression. Wagner's operas are rich in drama and emotions. Singers need to convey the complex characters and storylines effectively through vocal expression. Um, yes and no, because if you say that drama is carried in Wagner, is it meaning that then in Carmen from Bizet is not, or maybe in Faust from Maestro Gounod, then you do not carry? Uh, Opera is a gender to be performed in front of an audience. With that in mind, then you always need to take into account the dramatic expression. This is why I wouldn't say that it is only a particularity of the voices to sing Wagner. Next one, excellent diction. Well, not really. Acting skills. Well, not really. Wagnerian characters, in fact, on stage are usually very static. They barely move because the action is conveyed in the music and the words that they are singing rather than in the movements. It's not like, let me go back again to Carmen, it's not like Carmen that have to be flirtous, that has to be coquette. This is not how Wagner carries out the action. Breath control, every singer needs to be breath control, so no, don't agree with this by ChatGPT. Intelligence and interpretation, I think it can also be very offensive if you say that if you want to sing Rossini, you don't need to be an intelligent singer. So I think that I cannot agree with this one. And commitment to character. Well, if you are going to be on a stage for an opera that will last almost or more than 4 hours, you always need to be committed. Even if it is Wagner, because again, it could say, ah, no, if I am singing Donizetti, then I am not committed. But if I am singing Wagner, then I am committed. I think that is unfair. That is not true. But now I would like to mention something about Wagner, and this is very interesting. Keep in mind that Maestro Verdi believed in destiny. Maestro Wagner, Maestro Verdi believed that many things would happen because something else happened. Such as, if you remember, that Rigoletto was in fact called alla maledizione, la maledizione, because based on that maledizione in the very first act, and that is actually, he wraps up Rigoletto, everything that happens in between, it's just what needs to happen in between so that the maledizione can crystallize. However, Rossini didn't believe in magic, and that's why he built his Cenerentola, leaving outside all the magic because he didn't believe it. But Wagner, in particularly, I wouldn't say magic, but Wagner believed or liked or loved mythology. We are going to discuss a little in depth, not the cycle of the ring, but another of his creation. But keep that in mind. In order to build those worlds, Wagner recurred to one topic that he liked a lot. Wagner recurred to the topic of mythology, Nordic mythology in part of it, in the other was Christian, but he recurred to that mythology in order to find the resources, the materials, the people, the characters, the scenes, the stories that he wanted to share. And so, what are some of those elements that Wagner took in order to build most of his operas? He took Nordic stories based on many original Norse myths that were in fact written in form of poetry and prose narratives were taken by Wagner to build part of his operas. In particular, the Ring Cycle transformed the original myths into a series of four operas, thus Rheingold, Der Valkyrie, Siegfried, and Götterdämmerung, which we mentioned earlier, where he integrated elements of drama, philosophy, and psychology into the narrative, creating a complex and highly symbolic work. I wanted to make a comparison here, but please don't take it by heart. It's just for the purpose of trying to make myself explain. Uh, if you have read Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, of course, I am speaking of the British writer, novelist, who, among other things, because he wrote a lot, he wrote that series of books that later came into a series of movies. And if you attended the movies, of course, you know that I am talking about that turned out to be somehow close to the cycle of the Nibelung, because there you also have a ring that will rule other rings. But the reason why I am talking about J.R.R. Tolkien is because Tolkien built not only a story, Tolkien built a whole world. Tolkien built a world or worlds where there are creatures, where there are different lands, where there are different languages. He even dares to provide words in that language that he invented. What I would like to come to get to is that the level of complexity of what J.R.R. Tolkien created is of such depth that you really need to invest and to pay full attention to what he's actually telling you so that you can understand where he's going to. J.R.R. Tolkien is so full of details, names, events, interrelated situations that you really need to pay attention. And that's what Wagner, in his own field, did. He took a number of elements from myths. He took a number of elements from those Nordic stories. He took a number of things also from the Christian religions, but he took all those elements and created a new world, such as the world he created in Parsifal, or the world he created in the Cycle of the Ring, or the world he creates in Tristan und Isolde. At the end, what he's giving us is a world, a story that is told in music. That's what Wagner did. He didn't write, he was not a novelist, he was a musician. And he created worlds in the shape of music. Music by just instruments, or music that is to be sung, but stories and worlds that are to be shared in the form of music. And I said that I wanted to stop a little more in only on one of his creations, and I would like to stop here in Parsifal. And this is where we asked ChatGPT to provide an analysis on Parsifal. What are the sources that Wagner used to build Parsifal? By the way, I wanted to use Parsifal because Parsifal is the first complete opera that I had the opportunity of watching, and I remember that I was captured by the very first seconds of the melodies that Wagner created. It was like opening, it was like discovering a new, different world. That's what Parsifal meant to me. This is an opera of such a beauty, but a very different beauty. It's not just a beauty as in the sense of the melodies of French composers. It is a very profound, full of meaning melody that I keep in my mind from Parsifal, and that's why I chose this one to be sharing with you. So, ChatGPT says that the influences on Wagner to write Parsifal, or the sources where he took the information from, are Parzival, written by Wolfram von Eschenbach. This is an epic poem, and it is a significant source for Wagner's Parsifal because Eschenbach's work tells the story of Parzival, a young knight who embarks on a quest for the Holy Grail. This time, this is Christian. Christian beliefs that he takes as base for Parsifal, and Wagner adapted and reinterpreted this medieval tale to fit his own artistic and philosophical world. Second source for Parsifal, Grail legends and the Arthurian mythology. Wagner drew from various Grail legends and Arthurian myths to shape the narrative of Parsifal. The Grail, a sacred and mystical object associated with the Last Supper and Christian lore, serves as a central symbol in the opera. But Wagner needed, in order to make it, uh, to provide, to build his own world, he created characters like Gurnermans, Kundry, and Amfortas from a number of different Arthurian sources. Christian mysticism. While he drew from medieval sources, Wagner also infused Parsifal from Christian mysticism, because the opera explores the themes of sin, redemption, and the transformative power of compassion. The role in Wagner's opera takes on more explicitly Christian significance than in some of the medieval sources. Number four, some other philosophical and symbolic elements. In addition to medieval and Christian influences, Wagner injected his own philosophical ideas into Parsifal. The opera reflects Wagner's views on the role of art, the search for meaning, and the potential for redemption through compassion and self awareness. Number five, final provided by ChatGPT, Wagner's own libretto. Wagner wrote the libretto for Parsifal himself, and he crafted the text to convey his unique interpretation of the Grail legend. The libretto is filled with rich symbolism, allegory, and poetic language. Parsifal is one of the most beautiful operas ever written. If you have the chance of watching it, make sure you have the time to follow it completely, but I can assure you that it will be worth it. Before we reach the final part of today's conversation, I also wanted to mention another topic that people like to talk about very often. Again, I think it is more like a waste of time because people say that the later operas by Verdi, in fact, I am talking more about uh, Otello. Remember the Otello or the Chocolata Project, as it was also known. Otello, the one of the last operas just before Falstaff. Falstaff is his final opera. People see that Verdi has evolved in more of that continuous flow of music and action rather than its separate numbers of duets, solos, orchestra ensembles. And so people think and say that Verdi ended up understanding Wagner's leitmotif and did it himself. Basically saying that Verdi copied Wagner. Basically saying that Wagner was right and that was the definitive evolution of Verdi had to be Wagner's. And if we understand how, we just need to understand that Verdi evolved the only way Maestro Verdi could evolve from his own experience. The experiences of his youth, the experiences of his life, the experiences of what he had composed in the past is what at the end gave the Verdi we know. So Verdi at the end of his career is not just a copy of Wagner. Verdi evolved the way he had evolved, and Wagner walked the path that he decided for himself. They were, of course, Wagner died almost 20 years earlier than Maestro Verdi. Uh, 70 years was Mr. Richard Wagner when he deceased, but Verdi lived for more years, and he never meant to confront himself with Wagner because Maestro Verdi understood and knew that they were simply different. One of them, who became later the symbol of the Italian Risorgimento, Maestro Verdi, with all his Italian uh, blood and veins, and the other leading to a new perception of what musical composition had to be, and that had to be Wagner. But just go the simplistic way of saying that Verdi evolved in a way that he copies Wagner is purely, from my perspective, it's just a waste of time. Well, there is something that I also needed to know. I was to share with you. I was telling you that one of the things that we need to mention about Richard Wagner is that he composed and he created worlds, and part of these worlds are two things. One of them is that Wagner was very specific on what the orchestra, on how the arrangement, the layout of the instruments or the orchestra needed to be. Wagner had very clear in his mind how he needed certain instruments to sound. And that's why he said, for this we have these violins here, but the second violin's there, and we will have the braces here, or we will have an extended use of woodwinds, or we will do something else there. Because Wagner really knew how he wanted his operas to sound. And also related to that, number one, and you might be familiar with that one again, is that he even he managed to have uh, a theater, yeah, a theater, a place where his operas are performed. Of course, if you're a Wagnerian yourself, you already know that I am talking about this very famous, worldwide famous Bayreuth Theater. The Bayreuth Theater was built with the purpose of presenting Wagnerian operas. One, what I was telling you, because not only it is the arrangement, the order, or the area which each of the instruments is located in the orchestra, but also the location of the orchestra in the theater. The orchestra is placed in such a way that it is hidden from the sight of the audience. Typically, one can see the maestro and the orchestra playing. From Wagnerian's perspective, this was not meant to be. And this is why this theater, if you would like to look for that, the Bayreuth Theater, look for that one in the internet, is built in a way that the experience of the orchestra does not interfere with what the audience is listening to, as they are not actually watching the orchestra. But the Bayreuth theater has other particularities that I would also invite you to explore and to discover by just investigating in the internet, because everything there is meant for a purpose. Everything there from Wagner's perspective was meant to captivate people and facilitate the introduction to those worlds that he created. Of course, the largest and most important celebration of Wagner is at Bayreuth. So the Bayreuth Festival, or the Bayreuth Festspiele, is yearly. Of course, you have to attend that if you have the time and if you have the money. You can have the pleasure of enjoying The, I would say the most Wagnerian experience. Instruments are arranged per instructions of the composers. Theater is built per instructions of the composer, and people who perform there are specialists in the Wagnerian repertory. So if you want to have a full immersion, go if you have the time to the Festspielshaus in Bayreuth. Um, last thing that I would like to mention, because it is usually also shared that Wagner was a very difficult person to deal with. But the same was said around Verdi. People could barely manage Maestro Verdi. Rossini, even though he was a very uh, smart, charismatic, happy guy, Rossini was not an easy guy to deal with, and neither was Donizetti. So why again paying too much attention to the character of Wagner? Well, if you're aware of the biography of Beethoven, you know also that Beethoven was not either an easy person to deal with. But we are here for what they created. We are here or for what they gave to us. We are not here just to criticize their personal life, only maybe to try to understand more the human behind the composer, but only for the purpose of understanding the human behind the composer. If Wagner had a bad temper, well, if Wagner was for many people too nationalistic, well, that's what Wagner was. If Wagner really believed in what he did, I think that it's just great. You cannot invest all your life in creating something that you don't believe in. So why we must criticize his temper, his beliefs, and his nationalism when he gave us all these worlds that are part of the Wagnerian creations. Wagner created worlds, and I would like to invite you to join and to immerse those worlds that Wagner created in the music for the posterity. Thank you very much.